Hi everybody, Miss Tammy here and welcome to the Mixed Media course. I'm really excited to be able to present some classes to you guys via our online platform to keep you creative and busy throughout this time when we can't see each other face to face. I've designed this term around going back to some fundamentals, but also trying to have a look at some artists that have really shaped art today and looking at their styles of work and how we might be able to learn from them. We've got the first lesson on Georgia O'Keeffe, so we'll move on to that shortly and I'll talk to you about her. We've also got some cute watercolour jellyfish just to strengthen our skills around watercolours. Then we have MC Escher and we're looking at repetition and pattern. We've also got some steampunk insects. They're always fun to do. Anything steampunk's fun. Then we've got some watercolour botanicals. We're also looking at some self-portraits and tones of skin tones and how to create those with paint. We're looking at CJ Hendry. I love CJ Hendry. She's an Aussie artist who now lives overseas and she does amazing realism work with pens. So we're going to have a look at her. And lastly, Margaret Keane. Now, Margaret Keane has a really interesting story where her husband tried to plagiarise her work and pretend that he was the artist behind all of her amazing creations. So I'll tell you about her story in that lesson as well. And there's a few others that I haven't mentioned, but we've got a lot to do. So we've got a couple of painting lessons, a couple of watercolour lessons, and a couple of technique-based lessons just to get you refining those skills around drawing. So we're going to have a look at tone and we're going to have a look at, as I said, on repetition and pattern as well. So the idea is that I'll do a quick demo, just introducing the topic each week. If there's anything in particular that I need to show you skill-wise, I'll do that during the demo. And then throughout our lesson, our Zoom meeting, we'll talk a little bit more into how you develop your work throughout the lesson, because obviously an hour and 15 minutes is a long time, so it's a bit difficult for me to say everything in the demo. So that's how it's going to work this term, and I'll see you again shortly to introduce Georgia O'Keeffe. Hi everybody, today we are looking at an artist called Georgia O'Keeffe. She's one of the most established, famous female artists of our current generation. She actually passed away in 1986. She's from America, primarily New York. She began her training, as most artists do, at the School of Art, but she found that a little bit frustrating, so she went on to become a commercial illustrator at the time. She started to get a lot of training around very traditional styles of art, which she kind of felt very restricted by. So she decided to jump outside of that a little bit and become a little bit more abstract. She also did a lot of watercolours at that time as well and learned how to work with those. She had a dealer and a photographer who worked with her called Alfred. Funnily enough, her and Alfred developed a relationship and ended up getting married, and people like Frida Kahlo and Margaret Keane and others have all found themselves in a very similar situation where you find somebody that loves the same things that you do and you end up falling in love and getting married. She spent a lot of her time in New Mexico creating lots of different artworks, and the reason I chose Georgia O'Keeffe today to look at is not just because she's probably the most famous female artist of her time, especially in America, but also her use of colour. Very, very interesting use of colour. So this is a colour theory lesson, if you like, and today we're going to have a look at a couple of her images and you're going to pick one to try to paint. Now, it sounds simple enough, but when you start to get into her artwork, you'll see that she uses a lot of tinting and shading. So tinting is where we add white to a colour and shading is where you add black to a colour to create the variations. The picture that I have here sold for $44 million, let me repeat, $44 million in 2014. It's called Jimson weed. It's just a typical flower, but you can actually see there's quite a lot of tone and shading and tinting happening within the flower and also the leaves. But she's also got a really beautiful sky background as well. So you could pick that artwork for your painting today. Or this is a Lake George reflection. Now I really, really love this one because of the colours that she used. However, when I was looking at it, I thought to myself, the colours don't reflect perfectly. She's got a couple of bushes in her reflection over here that don't actually appear up there, which I thought was kind of unusual. So I was drawn to that, so I picked that one for you as well. This is called Lost and Found, so it's just a typical flower. However, as you look at this limited colour palette, So we've got orange and pinks and whites and a couple of purples in there. It's just beautiful. It's really smooth. It's kind of organic in the way she's painted it. So that's another one that you could paint. This one's called Abstraction. I also liked the flow of this picture. She's got nothing represented in that actual picture. You can't tell if it's a flower or a landscape or anything like that. However, her use of colour within these sections is very interesting. So you'll have to have a really close look at that one if you pick that one for your art piece today. And the last one was called Nature Forms, Gasp. This is just a beautiful picture where it just makes me feel like I'm in a dream. And I thought that might be interesting to create as well. So she uses colour beautifully, but she also uses shape magically. She's a very established artist in the area of shape and one of the best that you can learn from. Before we jump into our Zoom, I just want you to pick which one you're going to use. So let's just say you might choose Abstraction. And whatever you're painting on today, whether that be a canvas or cardboard or anything like that, it's a really good idea if you start to outline the sections in each of the pictures that that you've chosen for today. So for this one, for example, you might sort of try to get that shape spiraling out from the middle first, and you could sort of draw that in there. Just a couple of lines. Don't forget, when you draw really heavily on canvas with a dark pencil, you can actually see through that sometimes, and that's not really what you're after. So just a couple of lines just to separate what George has done in this painting to start with would be really helpful. So you might just do something like this for this first one, just to give you an idea of where things are going to go. Okay, that's a bit rough there. If, however, you chose the landscape that's Lake George Reflection, then the main things you'd want to concentrate on, as we know in landscapes, there's a horizon line. She's got one across there, which is the darker colour. She's actually got that as a thick line, and then a little white one underneath it. But then you could just basically just put in those sections that she's got. The mountain coming up the top here, one over here, this little one off to the side, and then she's got a couple in the middle there. If you really were keen, you could probably come along and draw those bush shapes as well if you wanted to, both at the top and also where they've reflected. Now, as I've mentioned to you, the reflections of these bush shapes are not a mirror reflection, so they're not perfectly the same. They're not always the same colour or shape, so you could just emulate whatever you wanted to in terms of being able to just create a piece like it. So it just gives you a bit of a starting point for where you're going to put the colour. So basically I could then go and mix up through here this blue, and then I know exactly what I'm going to put in that section there. So when we jump onto the Zoom, the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is to outline just the major shapes that you can see in the picture that you've chosen for today. Then I'll talk to you each individually about how to approach your painting if you're not sure. And we're going to work really hard today on the tinting of each of those colours to try to get exactly the same shades and tints and tones that George has used in her artwork. All right, let's get painting and I'll see you soon.